Our story begins with a woman crying while the narrator says that there are people in this world so unlucky that you can't help but feel sorry for them. We see that this woman was trying to escape from a bizarre monster with multiple arms, which was attacking other humans around her. The narrator says that Kang Sam was one of those people, and then we cut to a scene of a little boy watching a news report about the monster attacks. In it, we see that Kang Sam's parents also died while they were on their way to pick him up from school. As if that wasn't bad enough, his relatives not only stole all the assets that were supposed to be his, but also abandoned the boy on the streets to live as an orphan. But living on the streets gave the boy an incredible determination, forcing himself to even eat spoiled food to survive. Little by little, he managed to get a job, starting to study like a man possessed, sleeping only 4 hours a day between work and school. He was very talented and hardworking, but fate was always cruel and never gave a shred of luck to our unlucky protagonist. A string of misfortunes fell on him. When he went to take a test, his appendix burst, and he had to give up on it. He tried to take another test, but the bus he was on overturned halfway there, and he ended up arriving late and missing the test. On another random day, he was about to leave the house when a bike fell and somehow jammed his door, trapping him inside and making him miss school. Even though he was doing his best, a bunch of unlucky incidents like these kept happening to him, leading the protagonist to a life full of failures. He was about to give up on becoming a hunter or getting a decent job, but he still had one last hope if everything else went wrong. That hope was the awakening. There are people chosen by the gods who are born with dormant talents, and when they turn 20, those talents awaken. The awakening was half the journey to becoming a hunter, and that's why Kang always trained as much as he could to strengthen his body for the day of his awakening. But it seems even that didn't work out for the poor guy, because on the day of the exam to determine his hunter rank, he received an F rank, the lowest of all. The examiner explained that he had no abilities whatsoever, and that if there's 1% of people with natural talent who make it to the top, the protagonist would be part of the 1% below even the worst. To make things worse, the examiner even let out a little laugh at the situation, and even though he apologized, all of it crushed the protagonist's spirit. After all that, time passed and the story cuts to the present, where the protagonist is now 25 years old. We see a wolf-like creature attacking the protagonist, who tries to defend himself with his shield. His effort to block the attack is so intense that he even ends up breaking his arm in the process. The creature charges at him, full of rage in its eyes, ready to finish him off with its teeth. But the protagonist grabs the wolf's paws and looks at it with determination, showing that he won't go down that easily. He grips the creature's arm and flips it downward to try and throw the wolf off balance. And as it falls, the protagonist lands a solid knee strike right on the creature's snout. The creature then crashes violently to the ground, knocking everything over along the way. The protagonist then looks at someone and begs her to use her magic already, for the love of God, because things are getting bad for him. This person starts charging a fireball and calls the protagonist a human shield, telling him to wait because she's still concentrating her magic. Kang realizes he's gotten himself into a bad situation. He explains that he formed a team with that mage and another tank, but he regrets doing it. They're surrounded, and the other tank already lost an arm in the middle of all this chaos. On top of that, the mage, who's supposed to be casting spells to deal damage to the monsters, for some reason isn't managing to do his job properly. These wolf-faced creatures are called gnolls, and even though they're not strong monsters, an F-rank mage still struggles to beat just 2 of them without another mage's help. And we see that one of the gnolls is getting back up while the protagonist realizes he almost got killed just to tire it out. That's when the mage finally stops stalling and finishes charging the spell, telling the protagonist to get out of the way. He aims his fire bow at the enemies and says he's going to finish them off with a single strike. The protagonist and the other hunter feel relieved because he finally finished charging, while the gnolls stare at them with hatred in their eyes. Then the mage finally fires and the arrow flies toward the 2 monsters. But he misses, and the arrow hits the ground before even reaching the enemies, and they just stand there not understanding anything. The protagonist panics and curses at the mage, saying he wasted magic by shooting the arrow at the ground, and that now they're screwed. But their conversation is interrupted when the other hunter drops his sword on the ground. And when the protagonist looks, the guy is on the floor, almost being devoured by one of the gnolls. And now without his sword, he can't do anything but ask the protagonist for help. But he's also busy fighting the other gnoll and tells the warrior to hold on while he's on his way. In the middle of the chaos, he glances to the side and sees that the mage has opened a portal and realizes that he's fleeing and leaving them behind. The mage, with the most shameless face possible, says that he saw all 3 of them were about to die, so at least one of them should survive. And he even mocks the protagonist, calling him a human shield, which makes him furious. The narrator explains that the protagonist was a tanker, usually the role given to people without powers, and that's why they were also called human shields. No one would be surprised if they died at any moment, since they were considered disposable tools by higher-ranking people. Realizing that this is the reality and that the other hunter is about to be devoured by the gnoll attacking him, the protagonist even thinks about fleeing through the portal that's still half open, since dying trying to save someone with no value would be a meaningless end to his life. But before he can cross the portal, he is interrupted by someone who says he was chosen by someone named Asmaun, the god of trials and suffering. He doesn't understand anything and just stands in front of that wall while we see that this person is actually a beautiful woman with white hair. The protagonist gets furious and asks where the portal went, the one that was right there a moment ago. But the woman simply lets out an absurdly loud scream, saying that from now on he will have to undergo a trial to pay for the karma of his past life. Kang doesn't understand anything she's saying and can only cover his ears to protect himself from the woman's explosive scream. He wonders what she meant by past life, and then the woman jumps from the top of the wall and lands in front of him, cracking the ground in the process. The protagonist doesn't even have time to process what just happened when a Null appears behind him and pierces him with its claws. The woman then looks at him in that state with a strange smile and asks him to please make the right choice. Then the story cuts to that other hunter who was being attacked by the Null. He's still alive but struggling to escape. He wonders where it all went wrong in his life, and we find out that his name is Kim Chunsik. We then see a flashback of this hunter's life. He lived with his parents, but his father was a drunk who beat his wife, and unable to take it anymore, she decided to abandon them both. But it didn't take long for his father to die in a car accident, leaving Kim to live with his grandmother as the only family he had. Before the world was attacked by monsters, Kim was just a normal boy. He lived with his grandmother and helped her however he could when he grew up. He worked like any regular salaried employee without getting involved with the hunters until something happened that became the turning point in his life. His grandmother collapsed due to a rare disease, and the doctor said the treatment would be very expensive for him. With no way to get that absurd amount of money, he realized he needed to find a fortune somehow, even if it meant risking his own life. That's when he decided to become a hunter, but he also failed the hunter exam when he turned 20, so things were looking bad for him. But his grandmother was the only family he had, and he was going to do everything he could to protect her. So with a lot of effort, he eventually managed to become a hunter. But then we cut to the present day where he's being attacked and about to die. In his memories, Kim regrets accepting a mage's proposal to go on that mission, and he already suspected that guy would abandon him at some point. About to lose the struggle of strength against the Null, he thinks about how his grandma will be once he's no longer there to help with her treatment. But then out of nowhere, the wolf stops attacking, and we see a sword hit it right near the ear, putting an end to the monster. Kim is in shock and has no idea what just happened or how he's still alive. And to explain that, the story goes back a few moments to when Kang was struck by the wolf's claws. That woman points at him and says that in his past life he was a demon, and explains that's why his current life is surrounded by misfortune. The protagonist doesn't understand anything, not even how he's still alive after taking that blow, but the woman simply places her hand on the wolf's claw, and it disappears like paper. He touches his stomach and realizes the wound from the wolf's attack has already healed, as if it had never happened. Then Kang asks the girl what's going on and if he heard her right. She explains again that he was a demon, and we briefly see an image of someone who seems to be the protagonist in a past life. Kang still doesn't understand anything, but the woman says that whether he believes her or not is up to him. But she warns that if he doesn't resolve the problem with his past karma, he will never have a happy life. But by completing the trials, he can cleanse the sins of his past. Not to mention, he'll earn rewards according to the difficulty of the trial, so he needs to accept this mission because it's the only way he'll ever live a happy life. She then runs toward the protagonist, who's still unsure of what to do, and says it's time for them to begin the first trial. The mission is to escort the hunter Kim Chunsik safely out of the world they're currently in. The protagonist tells her to stop talking nonsense, since the two of them together couldn't even handle the monsters before, so what is he supposed to do now? She interrupts the boy by pulling out a strange glowing blue leaf and says this is his reward for the mission. Back to the moment where Kim was almost dying, we see the protagonist running toward the monsters with a sword in hand. The two gnolls notice him, and one of them already grabs a piece of wood preparing to fight. As they charge toward him, the protagonist uncaps something. A magic spell comes out from inside. That sword the protagonist was carrying becomes surrounded by that magic, and we see it's a spell that makes his blade absurdly sharper. With this new strength, he keeps charging toward the enemies, using his shield to block their attacks. It runs across the battlefield with a speed he didn't even know he had, dodging all incoming strikes. In the end, he slides beneath one of the monsters, and pulling his sword upward, he lands a clean blow that completely pierces the Null. The monster howls in pain, and taking advantage of this moment of distraction, the protagonist delivers the final strike with his sword. With rage in his eyes, he continues to drive his sword, and with all the strength he has, while the enemy tries to use its claw to push him off. But it's too slow, and before it can grab the protagonist, it collapses, defeated to the ground, never to rise again. The monster's claw managed to slightly wound Kang's arm, who's relieved that at least one of the gnolls is down. And in that moment of carelessness, the other gnoll nearly bites off a chunk of the protagonist, but he manages to dodge at the last second. Kang curses as he realizes his sword is still stuck in the other enemy, and he'll have to figure out a way to get it if he wants to win. He hears the voice of that woman in his head, warning him that the trials are made to force a person to risk their life, and that you should keep that in mind. He then draws a small dagger and decides to face the beast anyway, leaping at it and telling it to come at him with everything it's got. He defends against the enemy's claw strike, and because of his injured arm, he almost drops the dagger. But he holds on tightly, and with great effort, he manages to strike the null in a vital spot and drives the blade in with all his strength. The monster falls, now lifeless, and the protagonist takes a breath, relieved that he finally succeeded. But then he remembers that Kim is still in danger, and he runs to retrieve his sword, which is still stuck in the null. After grabbing it, he throws it with all of his strength and lands a perfect hit on the enemy holding Kim, finishing it off in a single blow. The protagonist looks at him with a relieved expression, then collapses to the ground, completely exhausted after the fight. But before that, he receives a message in his mind saying that the trial has been completed and he will now receive his reward. The protagonist then ends up fainting and is woken up by someone slapping his face and telling him to get up already. When the scene cuts, we see it's that woman looking impatient with the protagonist and already about to punch him if he didn't wake up. Kang is still dazed, but the girl hands him a piece of paper, saying that's his reward for completing the mission. The protagonist doesn't get it and asks why it's just a piece of paper, but the girl gets mad and tells him to be grateful because she went through the trouble of printing it for him. Out of nowhere, the paper turns into a high-tech system screen and the girl is surprised, saying that times have really changed, apparently. She finishes by saying that he hasn't completed the mission yet and that next time he shouldn't just faint out of nowhere, then simply says goodbye and disappears. The protagonist looks more closely at his reward and realizes he received a bunch of new abilities at once. Among them is a 3-star healing ability that, besides healing, also allows him to sacrifice his HP to recover more than usual. And the other is an evolution ability that increases his defense and says that when he reaches 50 holy power, he will evolve. The protagonist explains that most hunters only have 1-star skills, D rank and up can learn 2-star skills, and 3-star ones are only for the luckiest. So he gets super happy because his efforts were finally rewarded with a powerful skill. But then he remembers that the girl said he hadn't completed that mission yet because he still had to escort Kim out of that place. He goes to the friend lying on the ground and apologizes for getting distracted and forgetting about him, even wondering if he might already be dead. Kang notices that he's very weak and there won't be enough time to take him to a hospital in that condition. The protagonist then remembers his healing abilities and realizes that's exactly why he was given the reward just now. He tells Kim that he's going to be okay, and then begins to use his magic on him. His body was badly injured from the null's attacks, but the protagonist's magic starts healing all of his wounds completely. After that, the scene cuts to the outside at the Hunter Management office. We see that traitor mage from earlier walking toward a room, complaining about why they suddenly called him there. He walks in cockily, telling them to get it over with because he's in a hurry. But inside the room are several hunters who confront the mage, whose name is Moon Sunman, saying they need to talk about the last mission he went on. But they weren't alone in the room because the protagonist was also there, and when Moon sees him, he's already shocked just knowing the kid survived. The hunters tell Moon to sit down while he tries to escape through the door, so they order him to be restrained instead. The coward tries to run down the hallway, but is taken down by another huntress, who immobilizes him, saying he abandoned a comrade during his last mission. She continues and explains that a squad commander abandoning his comrades in the other world is a serious crime. Moon tries to talk his way out, asking if they have any proof that he really left them there on purpose. But the huntress shows him a screen and says they recorded everything, so he has no way to deny it. Because when his spell failed, he didn't hesitate for a second to flee, and that will be used against him in court. He starts to freak out upon learning he was recorded, and in the next room, the protagonist is just listening to everything. The huntress goes to speak with him and thanks him for his help, saying that this evidence will help solve the case, and adds that it must have been really hard for him to go through all that. According to her, there have been many cases of people killing other hunters in the other world, but having proof of those cases was extremely rare. But the protagonist says that luckily he always records all of his missions, and it's a good thing he did it this time too. The narrator explains that it was very easy for someone to take another person's life in the other world, which is why hunters always chose their partners very carefully. In Moon's case, he completely lost his composure when his attack failed and flowed without even feeling guilty. In the mage's mind, they were just human shields he paid to sacrifice themselves in his place. The huntress comments that after watching the footage, she saw that the protagonist is much stronger than a simple F-rank tanker, and asks why he's working as one. If he joined the army, he'd be given weapons to help fight monsters, but the protagonist says that firearms don't work well against more defensive monsters. And since he's already been through a lot of misfortune in this life, he'd rather not risk it with those weapons, and that's why he wants to grow as a hunter in his own way. After that conversation, the protagonist leaves the office feeling relieved, while wishing that Moon spends the rest of his life behind bars. But on the way, he runs into Kim, who recognizes the protagonist immediately. The man then kneels down and starts thanking him for saving his life earlier. The story then cuts to a few days ago, with Kim waking up in the hospital after being brought there by the protagonist. He begins to remember everything that happened, and that before passing out, he saw Kang fighting the gnolls to save his life. Kim realizes that he shouldn't have survived that and doesn't understand how the protagonist managed to defeat the monsters or why he was saved by him. But he's interrupted by the voice of his grandmother, worried because the boy is all injured. She scolds him, asking why he went on such a dangerous mission for her, and asks if he's gone crazy and wants to die along with her too. Kim tells her to calm down because of her high blood pressure and says that he's fine, but the old lady says he looks like a skeleton with how messed up he is. The man replies that at least he came out alive, but his grandmother says that if she dies it's fine because she's already sick, but that he better not go back on any more missions. Kim starts remembering the good moments he had with his grandmother and thinks about how he wants to live a happy and peaceful life by her side. And that's when his grandmother hugs him while crying and begging him not to throw his life away like that. The story then cuts back to the present, with Kim talking to the protagonist on the street, still bowing in front of him and making a huge scene. Kim thanks the protagonist, who replies that in the other world, you can only count on your teammates, so he had no choice but to save his life. Kang says he was scared too, and that he's not some kind of brave hero like Kim thinks he is. But the man keeps looking at him with admiration, which makes the protagonist uncomfortable, and he tells him to cut it out. The protagonist remembers he can't just tell Kim that he only saved him because of a mission, and he didn't expect they'd ever run into each other again. So he tries to slip away quietly, but Kim asks to at least repay him for the help. But before he can ask what the reward would be, once again the protagonist hears the voice in his head. She says that a new trial has been received and explains to him about Kim's mother's illness, and says the protagonist will have to donate 150 million won to cover the surgery. The protagonist, upon hearing all that, wonders why he should have to help this guy even more. The voice says that the reward for it will be a stat boost and a new 1-star skill. The protagonist checks his bank account and realizes he has the money, but it's everything he managed to save after years of work. He feels really sad about it since that was his entire life's fortune, but remembering the girl saying this would cleanse his karma, he decides to make the donation. She explains that since he accepted to walk this path of trials, if he wants to turn back, he'll lose all the rewards and get even worse karma, to the point where he could end up in a vegetative state for the rest of his life, and just thinking about that makes the protagonist realize he has no choice but to complete the missions. The protagonist says that the reward he'll get might be small, but if he doesn't do it, he'll never be able to take on future trials either. He thinks about how profitable the hunter profession is, and that if he becomes a renowned hunter, he can earn back those 150 million won in no time. Besides, in his current situation as an F-rank hunter, he can't even access the hunter's market, so getting at least one new skill is an advantage. So after thinking a lot, he decides to call the Hunters Association, makes the donation, and receives his new skill, which isn't revealed to us yet. The scene then cuts to a test being conducted, and the examiner calls the participants forward. He explains that it will be a test inside of virtual reality, where participants will control pre-made characters to test their abilities. The characters will have specific classes and roles, and the objective is to complete missions according to those roles, and there's no use complaining about which role you got. The examiner explains that if you're skilled, your character will have what it takes to complete the mission just fine, but if you fail, it won't be the character's fault. He then calls the protagonist's name and says that whether by coincidence or not, he's been assigned the role of the group's tanker. In addition, his mission is to endure an attack from gnolls for 5 minutes, something the protagonist has already done once. The system will give him a sword and a shield, and all the characters' stats will be locked at 30. They wish the protagonist good luck and send him into the virtual environment. Inside, doesn't take long for him to encounter 4 gnolls who already glare at him and prepare to charge. While the examiners observe the fight from outside, the protagonist thinks about how hard he had to work just to raise his stats by a little. Now he finally has a stat that reaches 30, the same as in the test. And as he's thinking about that, one of the examiners seems to take interest in him. The protagonist has acquired the Guardian Shield skill, which is perfect for tankers, and decides this is the best moment to test if it works well. The gnolls charge at him, but the protagonist stands his ground and nearly getting bitten by one of them. He blocks the bite with his shield, but another gnoll appears behind him and attacks with its claws. The protagonist jumps and manages to dodge at the last second, narrowly avoiding a direct slash to the face, though the monster ends up hitting the ground instead. He then approaches the creature and kicks it in the ribs, launching the monster away and making it crash into another nearby one. Another attack comes from above, but the protagonist is alert and defends himself with both his sword and shield. He realizes that having all of the character's stats at 30 is actually a good thing, since the character is stronger and more responsive than his real body. Combining that with his own battle experience allows the protagonist to handle the gnolls much better this time, once again drawing the examiner's attention. One of the operators comments that the protagonist's ability to read and react to situations is very impressive, and among all the candidates he's the most capable, even though he's just a tanker. The protagonist keeps fighting, using his shield to block the gnolls' attacks, and in the midst of it all, he throws one of them far away, which only makes the creature even more furious. But the monster notices 3 more NPCs passing by and decides to ignore the protagonist and go after them. The examiner says that one of the objectives of the tanker test is to see how well the protagonist can protect his allies, and wonders if he even noticed the NPCs there. The gnoll then charges at them, but that's when the protagonist finally uses his skill, Guardian Shield. which automatically draws the attention of all the gnolls toward him at once. Amazingly, the protagonist manages to block all 3 attacks. One of them he blocks from behind with his sword. The examiners are impressed, and the protagonist explains in his mind that this ability is meant to redirect the enemy's aggression and pull them toward the user. He says that Aesmoun, in the process of cleansing his karma, is gradually forcing him to play in a more altruistic way, sacrificing himself for the good of the group. The tanker's role is to stand on the front lines, protecting the group, and if anything goes wrong, they're the first to fall, which is why there's such high demand for more tankers. There was a time when people wanted to be tankers because it paid a lot of money, but over time people started avoiding this profession because it was too dangerous. The risk was high, but the reward was equally high, and for the protagonist, this was the perfect profession for him. To him, it was much better than betting everything on a life of bureaucracy and paperwork like other jobs. The tanker lifestyle fit in much better. The protagonist got so lost in thought that, without even realizing it, the test had already ended and the monsters had vanished. His priority now is to get promoted and leave F rank behind, because at this rank he can't even join high-level raids, and besides, he wants to get rid of the bad reputation of being low rank. And that's when he looks up the big screen showing the results, and we see that everyone is shocked at the protagonist's result, an impressive S+ rank, a perfect score. The scene cuts to the Hunters Association, where one of the examiners is failing a bunch of people and calling them all pathetic. He says these people can't even pass a basic test, so what were they thinking applying in the first place? The examiner asks if they don't know their own limits, since the battlefield isn't a playground for them to mess around in. While saying this, he recalls a traumatic event from his past, but he loses focus when he sees a file that grabs his attention. He's surprised by the protagonist's record, saying that he demonstrated the ideal behavior of a tanker, and on top of that, didn't take a single hit during the whole test. Moreover, he protected his allies masterfully after drawing the monsters to himself, and that's the highest level expected in the basic trials. But then the examiner is called over by another staff member, and we find out he's also a team leader. Back to the test, a huntress explains that in the next phase, participants will be divided into teams of 5 people, and 2 of those teams will do a combat trial. They'll be teleported to an E-rank zone, and to pass, they'll need to eliminate all the monsters in that zone, and only those who show good performance will advance. Each participant will be sent to a random zone, and they'll only find out who their teammates are when they get there. The team leaders will also be randomly assigned. She starts announcing the names of the team leaders. Team 1 will be led by a blonde boy named Min Hyunmo. Team 2 will be led by a boy named Jo Hambiel, and no one knows how he ended up in that position since he's already sweating nervously. They decide the 2 leaders will play rock, paper, scissors to decide who gets to choose team members first. Min Hyunmo wins and is called to pick someone for his team. He decides the first member should be a tanker, and Jo Hambiel comments that having a solid front line makes raids much easier, as long as the rest of the team can handle their roles. Min chooses a super muscular guy to be his team's tanker. When it's Jo's turn to pick, he gets even more nervous and realizes there are only 2 members left. He looks at Kang-san and asks if he's really a tanker since he's so skinny, but at least someone who can act as a tanker is better than nothing, so he picks him for the team. The team selection continues for a bit until it finally ends and the teams are complete. The examiner explains that in a real battle, no one will protect them, so they should use the next 30-minute break to prepare for the test and get to know their team. Min's team celebrates that they've got a solid tanker line, and the leader says that if everyone sticks to their positions, everything will go fine, and they start planning their strategy. Meanwhile, in the protagonist team, things don't seem to be going very well, and the atmosphere is awful. Seeing that the leader was too nervous to speak, the protagonist starts a conversation and asks if they're going to plan a strategy too. Hearing that, Jo awkwardly starts shouting, trying to get the team hyped by asking if anyone already has a strategy in mind. While they talk, that same examiner continues watching the protagonist. He comments on the protagonist's pass and the test he failed, saying he has potential but lacks talent. Then the 30 minutes are up and the examiners announce that the test is about to begin. The scene then cuts to inside the virtual environment, and we see Min's team walking through a grassy field, each wearing the outfits of the classes they were assigned. That's when the tanker in front yells for everyone to dodge, and we see an enemy appear out of nowhere and hit his shield. Min shouts for everyone to form up, saying there's a group of armed orcs ahead of them. The tanker uses his skill called Iron Body, which increases his defense and continues to block the orcs' attacks. Min shows that he's a good leader and orders the healer to buff and heal the tankers when needed, and tells the others to attack the orcs. The archer fires an arrow at one of the orcs, who easily blocks it with his hand. But that was just a distraction, so the swordsman could come in low and strike with his blade. The orc defends and their weapons clash. One of the orcs takes the chance to try and hit the swordsman by surprise with his axe. Realizing this would happen, the tanker uses Guardian Shield, the same skill the protagonist used earlier. That draws the attention of the axe-wielding orc, who charges the tanker, and the two engage in a clash between axe and shield. Soon the other two orcs join the attack, all three charging the tanker at once, who does everything he can to hold them off. Min explains in his mind that it might look like they're struggling, but with the buffs and healing from the healers, they should be able to hold out a while longer. So he and the archer take this chance to try and catch the orcs by surprise. Everything seems to be going according to plan, until Min hears a growl from afar and suddenly freezes, not knowing what to do. When he looks up, a horde of orcs is coming their way, all heavily armed. He counts and sees 8 more orcs approaching. It seems the first 3 were just a scouting party. He attacks one of them and runs off, ordering everyone to fall back behind the tanker. That tanker, whose name we now learn is Jungsu, is struggling to keep the 3 orcs in place and is nearly losing his shield. The healer shouts at him, saying he needs to hold the front line or they're all going to die immediately. Meanwhile, the examiners are watching everything from a distance using their drone. So one of them picks up a mic and starts speaking to them. He explains that there's something participants usually overlook. The government's ranking system isn't just to honor hunters. It's also to ensure the skill level of each rank. People trust an E-rank hunter to handle E-rank missions because that's what's expected of them. An F-rank tanker struggling to fight orcs was expected. If he could solo those orcs, by now he'd be testing for a rank higher than E. What he meant is that to pass this test, it's not enough for just one person to be skilled. Everyone has to be competent or they'll all fail together. Min, who's nearly collapsing, says the examiner is right, and if the tanker falls, they'll all fail the test. He orders the healers to give it their all to keep the tanker alive and says that while they do that, he and the attackers will flank the orcs from behind. Min charges forward and hits one of the orcs with his sword, nearly getting struck by the enemy's counterattack. Meanwhile, the tanker takes several hits and is on the verge of losing his shield. The battle continues with the archer landing shots on the orcs to draw their attention and the healers doing their jobs, until, after much effort, they manage to complete the test and exit the virtual environment. The tanker, who's the first to come out, collapses to his knees on the floor, completely unconscious and injured. The other participants are shocked to see him like that, and a nurse appears to provide first aid. The rest of the team is completely exhausted too, but at least they're congratulated for managing to complete the test. As the tanker is carried out on a stretcher, the announcer says it's now the turn of the protagonist's team. Joe, seeing all of this, immediately freezes and starts wondering if they're actually going to be okay. He and his group walk through the portal straight into a swamp, and Joe thinks their tanker is even weaker than the one from Team 2, so he's going to have to put him on the front line. And we see that not only him, but the rest of the team is also thinking about it as they walk through the mud. Meanwhile, the protagonist is deeply focused when out of nowhere they hear someone stomping heavily on the ground. Joe yells to warn everyone that something is approaching and tells them to get into formation while drawing her arrows. And that's when an armed goblin jumps towards them and lands in the mud. As if things couldn't get any worse, the group members start to feel their feet sinking into the mud. The examiner continues observing the test and explains that usually hunters carefully analyze the terrain before each mission. But in this test, they wouldn't have that chance and need to adapt to the environment mid-mission, whereas the goblins didn't have that problem. Realizing things have gone south, the group members try to retreat while a goblin comes flying with a knife to hit anyone in the way. But his knife hits his shield, and we see that Kang-san stepped in front to block the blow. He drives his sword into the goblin, causing it to retreat, now injured. Kang then tells them to calm down so they can respond to the goblin's attacks. One of the goblins draws his bow and aims at the protagonist, who deflects the arrow with his sword, then realizes the goblins are coordinating their attacks. Looking more closely, he notices there's a hobgoblin controlling them from somewhere. But at that moment, it didn't matter because he had the perfect skill for that situation. He then activates his skill called Guardian's Will, which increases defense and HP regeneration based on the number of enemies present. That gives him enough strength to send the goblins flying without even needing to move much. Both the examiner and the other members of the protagonist's team are in disbelief at what they're seeing. Joe takes the chance to shout for everyone to attack together, and they don't waste any time. They start defeating the goblins one by one, all inspired by the protagonist's strength, who starts to notice that his skill weakens as the enemies disappear. His defense and regeneration drop the fewer enemies remain on the field, and the protagonist finds this ability quite interesting. But it's not over yet because the protagonist feels a tremor in the ground and immediately tells everyone to fall back. He raises his shield to block the attack, but when he looks, he sees that it was an attack from a high-level orc, and no one understands why it's in a rank E zone. This is a rank D monster, so the group thinks something must have gone wrong with the test. They prepare to try and retreat, but when the protagonist looks at the orc's shoulder, he sees Asmound casually sitting on top of it. While the protagonist wonders why she suddenly appeared there, we see that not even the examiners were aware of this monster. They contact a hunter who was supervising the test, and he says they checked 3 times beforehand but found no sign of that orc. This hunter and his partners say they're going to stop the test because they can't watch any more participants get wiped out this time. The examiner, who was interested in the protagonist, tells them to wait and see what happens. But the examiner with glasses says he must be crazy, since the media has been watching them closely ever since the last incidents where hunters were eliminated. The hunter, who we find out is named Kim Youngmin, says he understands the concerns, but he knows what he's doing and isn't the type to make reckless decisions. He even says that if things get too bad, he'll go in himself to fix it, so they shouldn't worry and should give the group more time. But two other examiners think he must be joking, since Myeongmin had already been expelled from the battlefield because of that kind of behavior. Even with the risk of more participants being taken out, the examiner with glasses agrees and only says that Myeongmin will have to take full responsibility if anything happens. Back to the protagonist, Asmaun, who seems to have just woken up, says this is the protagonist's third trial, and he has to make sure all of his team members survive. If anyone is taken out by the orc, that life will fall on the protagonist's shoulders, and he realizes her voice is only in his head, and that no one else there can hear or see the girl. She ends the explanation by saying that if one of them dies, all the karma will come back on the protagonist, but since he's already been through something similar, he'll handle it just fine now. Before the protagonist could ask more, Asmaun says goodbye and asks him to do his best, disappearing in the middle of the orc's axe attack. The protagonist nearly takes the hit straight to the face, but manages to dodge at the last second, and the blow hits the mud. It's going to be a tough battle. He complains because he just became a rank E, and now they're already making him fight a monster of that level. He curses Asmaun and says that both she and everyone else want him gone because of the karma from his past life. Even so, giving up is not an option for the protagonist, and he tells everyone to get ready to attack, because he's going to hold off the orc's attacks. He raises his shield while the orc lifts its axe, ready to hit him full force. As the orc steps throw mud everywhere, the protagonist prepares to take the hit. He then dodges at the last second, and sword in hand, charges beneath the orc. The creature notices and, full of rage, swings its axe toward the protagonist, but the boy manages to dodge by spinning around backward. At that moment, he feels the strong wind from the orc's axe movement, and just that is enough to make him realize that even one hit from the orc would be the end for him. Jo, even though she's scared, draws an arrow and shouts to the team that the tanker is fighting to protect them, so they need to fight too. But everyone there had already given up long ago and are almost paralyzed with fear. One of them even wonders if they've lost their minds in the middle of that situation. The guy even blames the protagonist, saying that if he hadn't jumped in front, the examiners would have already stopped the test. And instead of doing something, he just stands there wondering what the administration is doing, while we see Myeongmin silently observing everything. Jo leaps and shoots her arrows at the goblins, defeating two in the process. The other two hunters, even though they're scared, still help in the battle. One of them levitates a tree and throws it at the orc. The monster turns around after being shot by Jo and tries to charge at them, but is stopped by the protagonist, who uses his sword to injure its foot. Even with them attacking with everything they have, the orc doesn't fall and gets angrier, to the point of entering berserker mode. The protagonist can't believe that a monster like that can still enter that mode. But when he least expects it, the orc attacks him at an absurd speed. At that moment, we can't see what happened to Kang, while Myeongmin just watches and Jo can only scream the protagonist's name. Then, after all the chaos, we see that the protagonist was launched far away by the orc's blow. He tries to get up, but the orc quickly appears in front of him and lands a punch that the protagonist blocks with his shield. But the orc uses its free hand to hit the protagonist with the handle of the axe, knocking him to the ground. The examiner with glasses says that things have already gone too far and they should intervene immediately, but Myeongmin keeps silently observing. Meanwhile, the protagonist manages to escape from the ogre and slides away, landing a blow to the monster's leg with his sword. But since he's already completely worn out, the protagonist's healing aura skill activates and his HP starts to regenerate. However, even that wasn't enough to heal his exhaustion. While his teammates ask if he's okay, the protagonist starts wondering if he should just give up. But after thinking it through, he realizes that the key to victory is simply to prevent the orc from passing a certain point. So gathers all the motivation he still has and says he's going to hold the orc there until the end so everyone else can make it out alive. He shouts to his companions, telling them not to worry and to keep fighting, saying that he can endure it. Amid the examiner's despair and fallen orcs, the protagonist group continues attacking the orc. Kang then realizes that the orc is also getting tired and tells everyone to hang in there just a bit longer because they can win. But the orc is just as angry as he is tired and delivers another powerful blow to the protagonist, sending him flying again. Now the group is already used to the orc's movements and takes advantage of the opening to bombard it with attacks. After so many attacks, the orc finally falls to its knees and Jo starts to feel relieved, saying they won. But suddenly, the orc lets out another roar and throws its axe at the protagonist with all the strength it still had. Jo yells for the protagonist to be careful and Kang braces himself, wondering if he'll be able to block it. But midway through, he realizes something is wrong and that the axe wasn't actually aimed at him. The axe was actually heading toward the hunter who had complained about the protagonist earlier, and because of the chaos of the battle, he had completely forgotten the guy was even there. Seeing this, the protagonist immediately panics because he remembers that if even one person goes down, he'll suffer a penalty to his karma. So he tries to run toward his teammate, but the scene cuts and we're left not knowing what happened. We then see the examiner with glasses apologizing for what happened, saying it was their mistake, and that they'll compensate all of them for the risk they took. Jo and the other hunters complain, saying they knew it could only have been an error, but the protagonist feels guilty because it all happened due to his karma. Surprisingly, Myeongmin also apologizes and says he'll take full responsibility for what happened. But when the scene cuts again, we see that the hunter appears alive behind him, leaving a mystery about what actually happened at the end of the test and how he survived. The examiner calls the protagonist and says he wants to have a private conversation with him. So the protagonist is taken to another room where they serve him tea and some waffles to eat. Myeongmin starts by asking if it's true that he's always worked as a human shield for the past 6 years, and the protagonist confirms. He says he was impressed by the protagonist's ability to adapt to situations and, for a moment, trusted that he was already good enough to defeat a ranked York. The protagonist finally understands why they spent so much time without doing anything, and even Asman didn't interfere. The man then gets straight to the point and says that his goal is to have the protagonist join the Rangers, which is the group he's part of. He explains that for now he only acts as an examiner, but that he'll return to being a ranger in a few months, and even says he can register the protagonist if he wants. That way he'll be able to work as a full-time employee, or if he prefers, he can work for him as a mercenary. He says he was impressed, and we find out what happened in the forest at the end of the test. The protagonist managed to push his teammate out of the way at the last second, and took the orc's axe blow directly to the chest. He fell backward and his teammates feared he had been taken out, but then his Guardian's Will ability activated and he was healed and gained a defense boost. Myeongmin says that not just anyone could have done that and asks once again if he wants to join the Rangers, offering him a contract to sign. Kang can't even believe that such a renowned group like the Rangers, who usually only recruit special cases, decided to recruit him now. He can hardly believe it's real and thinks about signing, but stops and decides to think more carefully about it. Since the Rangers fight against invading monsters and sometimes travel to other worlds for their missions, it would be the perfect place for Asmound to mess with the protagonist. And speaking of her, the moment the protagonist touches the contract, its letters change, and a message appears saying the 4th trial is about to begin. He must join the Rangers and devote himself to protecting the world. If he succeeds, he'll receive a new special piece of information, so the protagonist, with no choice, decides to accept. The protagonist even wipes his eyes to check if he read it correctly, and in doing so, he sees another page stating that he can complete this trial just by accepting the offer. He gets pissed at Asman because she didn't even let him read the contract first. What if there's something worse in Myeongmin's contract? With nothing else to do, he accepts the offer, and Myeongmin is surprised that he agreed so quickly. He had no idea there was a goddess manipulating the protagonist. But the protagonist says he'll only accept if he can join as a mercenary. That way, even if Myeongmin is his boss, he'll still be able to choose which missions to take. Since the condition of the trial was just to accept the proposal, he decides he'll only take the missions Asmound forces him to pick. Myeongmin accepts and thanks the protagonist for his cooperation, but internally, he doesn't seem too happy that he ended up becoming a mercenary. He then signs the contract and says it's time for him to go, standing up to leave the room. But at that moment, something bizarre happens. The protagonist feels strange, and out of nowhere, several souls seem to leave his body all at once, causing him to lose his balance. Myeongmin asks if the protagonist is okay, who's still standing there, not understanding what just happened to him. Kang says he's fine, but in his mind he has no idea what happened. He saw several bizarre images and realizes this must be the special information he received. Whatever it was that he saw, we won't find out for now because the story cuts to 1 week later. Kang-san appears at a bus terminal wearing a beanie, and it seems very cold where he is. He mentions that the information he received was about his past life as a demon. The protagonist received all of it right after signing the contract, and it made him feel so dizzy that he had to run to the bathroom to recover. This information told him to head to Chirwon in Gangwon province, where he would have to go through a dungeon. And if he succeeded, he would receive a memory fragment from his past life. The protagonist believes that Asmound is actually trying to transfer the memories of that demon into his mind. The protagonist explains that when the world connects with another reality above the ground, it's called a link, but when it connects with one below, it's a dungeon. They're hard to access because they're underground, and when a new dungeon opens, people nearby describe it as hell opening up. The memories from the protagonist's past life must be somewhere in that unregistered dungeon. Standing in front of the cave that leads into the dungeon, the protagonist says he doesn't know why Asmound wants to reveal those memories to him. But the protagonist has had a horrible feeling ever since he received that information last week, and he needs to find out what's causing it. The protagonist decides to go in, but first he places a magic barrier at the entrance to prevent the monsters inside from escaping into the world. That's the first rule when exploring a dungeon. Other basic rules are to prepare food and equipment, since you never know how long you'll be in there. And it's also important to have a flashlight, as it's usually completely dark inside dungeons. The protagonist takes a while to find his flashlight, but when he finally does, the first thing he sees is a huge skull in front of him. He screams in fright and realizes that they're actually skeleton soldiers, and one of them is armed with a sword. The protagonist feels there's definitely something important in there. The problem is, he once struggled just to defeat one skeleton, and now there are 5 in front of him. But now the protagonist is trained. After almost being wiped out so many times, he's learned how to handle things on his own. He manages to defeat the skeletons with his sword and explains that skeletons attack non-stop because they don't feel pain, but they're weak to divine attacks. That type of attack causes dark-type monsters to disintegrate instantly. The protagonist says that if all the monsters in there have that attribute, he should be able to proceed alone. He does some stretches and says he was feeling weird before entering the cave, but now that feeling is slowly going away the deeper he goes in. Kang even thinks that Aesmoun might have finally decided to give him a real gift after all the trials he's endured so far. Since he's come close to being taken out so many times, he deserved at least a reward, and right in front of him appears a treasure chest. He happily runs toward the chest and thanks Aesmoun for the gift, but he spoke too soon, because a huge creature appears from the shadows and hits the protagonist hard with a blow that sends him sliding away. The owner of the weapon, which we now see is a steel ball with a chain, is a Dullahan, a headless knight, riding his horse while spinning the steel ball. He throws the object toward the protagonist, who ducks just in time and uses his magic to sharpen his sword just like he did in the fight against the gnolls. But this time, the Dullahan's armor proves to be much stronger and doesn't even get scratched by the protagonist's sword. He's so focused that he doesn't even notice the spiked ball coming at him at full force. The protagonist tries to block it with his sword, but is thrown back and realizes that not even with the help of magic can he cut through that ball. He realizes that the Dullahan is on another level, and to make matters worse, his sword is almost breaking from the impact. Kang keeps doing his best to dodge the Dullahan's attacks, but he knows that if the sword breaks, he won't stand a chance against a rank D monster like that. However, he notices something, as in the mission he received from Aesmoun, it only said he needed to clear the dungeon, but didn't say how. So nothing said he was required to risk his life fighting the Dullahan like he was doing. He realizes that the chest might be the reward Aesmoun mentioned to him, so with no time for questions, he decides to just grab the chest and run away with it. But he still needs to find a way to dodge the Dullahan in order to escape, and wonders how a creature without a head knows where he is to attack. The protagonist, for a moment, thinks about just taking the risk and running away randomly like a lunatic, but then he realizes something. The knight has no eyes, but his horse does, and it's definitely using its vision to locate him. So he throws his flashlight into the air, managing to blind the horse for a few seconds. The Dullahan gets confused by the horse's erratic movement and starts swinging his iron ball in all directions, but the protagonist uses the chance to run away with the chest. Amidst all that chaos, the knight manages to spot where the protagonist went and points at him. But Kang isn't stupid. He doesn't wait around and takes off sprinting toward the dungeon entrance. Only he had forgotten about the barrier he himself placed there, and explains that the barrier doesn't just block monsters, it also traps humans inside and takes time to deactivate. But by a stroke of luck, for the first time in the protagonist's life, the barrier disappears instantly, and he manages to get out of the cave in one piece. The cave then collapses, sealing the entrance, and the protagonist realizes that now he won't need to use the barrier to seal the place anymore. After all that ordeal, the protagonist finally has time to open the chest, and inside it, there's a skill, and strangely, a bottle of water. The protagonist decides to drink the vial that contained the skill, and it upgrades his Guardian Shield ability, increasing both his healing and defense. He doesn't know whether to feel happy or sad about it, since only his tank skills keep getting stronger. After that, he decides to open the water bottle, while thinking about how he used to think this whole past life talk was nonsense, but everything Aesmoun said so far has come true. The protagonist says he doesn't care about divine interference, but if recovering his memories will help him achieve the life he wants, then he'll do whatever it takes. He then drinks the liquid from that bottle and begins to have a vision of the past. In this vision, a swordsman named Jang Hyung from somewhere called Volcano has just soloed several warriors and swears on his name that he'll defeat a certain evil demon. He points his sword at a figure in the middle of the battlefield and calls it to battle. The creature flies toward the warrior, who draws his sword, but the fight doesn't last long. The scene cuts and the warrior is lying on the ground, completely beaten, wondering why that happened. While the demon stands in the middle of the battlefield, the warrior asks why he took the lives of so many innocent people. He remembers several happy families, and then the memory cuts to a child crying in the middle of the battlefield. The demon scratches his head and wonders what the warrior means by asking for a reason for what he does. He approaches the fallen warrior, and when he reveals his face, we see that he looks exactly like Kang San, and then he answers that the reason is simply because he likes it. The warrior is shocked by the answer but has no time to process it, because the demon attacks him immediately afterward. That's when the memory ends and the protagonist finds himself back in the forest, standing in front of the chest. Despite the traumatic vision, at least the protagonist realizes he gained two new abilities to use. The first is the demon's IQ. In addition to a permanent attack boost, it also increases his attack every time the protagonist takes someone down, and if he does it 100 times, the skill levels up. The second is the demonic sword first form. It unleashes a devastating slash that increases the protagonist's attack and also inflicts negative status on the enemy. While thinking about his new skills, the protagonist starts having bad memories from his current life, starting from when he lost his parents and his relatives fought over the inheritance. Even the time when his bus flipped over, leaving several people injured. The protagonist then realizes that all those bad things only happened because of him and the horrible things he did in his past life, from the loss of his parents to all the people who suffered accidents just for being near him. Amid all that sadness, the protagonist gets a call from someone named Jung Min-hyuk, who seems to know him and asks if he wants to help with a little job. The scene cuts and the protagonist goes to meet Min-hyuk at a diner. He says it's been a while since they've seen each other and that he heard the protagonist was promoted. He asks again if the protagonist wants to join his management team at Chiozeng, but the protagonist is still feeling down and asks what he's talking about. The protagonist finds it strange because that's the #1 company in the industry, so why would they be interested in him? But more importantly, Min-hyuk had stopped being a hunter a long time ago. The protagonist didn't know why, but at least now he was working at a good company. Before thinking about whether to accept or not, the protagonist once again has another flashback of one of the tragedies that happened to him. In this one, he was riding a scooter on his way to school. He was with another classmate when both of them fell. The protagonist says he's not hurt, but the other boy complains in his mind because every time he walks with the protagonist, they always fall. The boy even mocks the protagonist, saying it must be a curse, and that maybe he even sent his own parents to the grave too. The protagonist gets angry hearing that, but the one who confronts the boy is Min-hyuk, who asks if that's really something you say to a friend. The boy asks why he suddenly started yelling, and Min-hyuk says there are things you can say out loud and things you absolutely cannot. He tells the boy to apologize to the protagonist, who accepts the apology and says it's okay. Min-hyuk then hops on his scooter and continues on his way, telling the protagonist to follow him, while the security guard guides the students. Then the scene cuts back to the present. Min-hyuk says the protagonist is now going to start taking high-level raids since he moved up to rank E, and having a company support him would help a lot, since they can choose the best teammates for him and help with his growth as a hunter. The protagonist still can't forget his memories as a demon and wonders if he'd really be okay continuing as a hunter. He tells Min-hyuk that he only came to the diner today just to see his friend's face again after so long. The protagonist was going to ask him something, but he gets interrupted when Min-hyuk says the protagonist probably didn't get promoted because of his skills, and says that if he became rank E, it was probably thanks to some examiner who felt sorry for him. After all, even a failed hunter can go far with help from someone like that. He keeps talking to the protagonist, trying to convince him to join the company, but suddenly the protagonist feels something strange. He has another vision from the past when he was still a demon and starts feeling sick, just like before. Min-hyuk gets worried and asks if he's okay, saying that if he's pushing himself too hard, then he really needs an agent like him. But the protagonist feels that way because he just received a message on his phone saying he had officially joined the Rangers team. He apologizes to Min-hyuk for having to leave so suddenly, even though it's been ages since they last talked, but that wasn't the time for him to dwell on it. He says he really just came to see his friend and to say thank you to him. Min-hyuk says it's fine and hands over the phone that the protagonist had forgotten on the table. But they're interrupted by a news report saying that an E-rank portal had suddenly opened, and that the area they were in was considered dangerous. Min-hyuk says they need to find shelter, and the protagonist tells them to follow the people running to the shelters. But then a lizard-like monster carrying a giant trident crashes through the window, breaking everything. It knocks over the tables and lands on top of one of the customers who desperately tries to escape the monster. The man screams for help while his wife watches in worry. Unable to do anything, and the protagonist realizes he has to do something. Min-hyuk grabs his shoulder and says they need to get out of there quickly, because more monsters like that one will arrive soon, and no one would blame a rank E for running away to save himself. He tells the protagonist to stop acting like a hero and get out of there before they tear him apart, but the protagonist once again remembers his past. Kang sees that the monster already has another human impaled on its trident and is about to do the same to the man on the ground. The protagonist knows he can't let this continue. He keeps getting flashes of the people he annihilated in his past life. He finally makes up his mind and activates his demonic sword skill, charging at the enemy and hitting it with a direct slash. The monster is sent flying, and the old man reunites with his wife, while Min-hyuk stands there, stunned by the protagonist's ability. Kang says that now he's different from who he was in his past life, and tells everyone to flee before more enemies arrive. As Min-hyuk looks at the protagonist in complete shock, the boy says he'll prove to everyone just how much he's changed. The scene then cuts to some time after the attack. Police have arrived and are helping the civilians who survived the lizard men's attack. Min-hyuk is on the phone with someone, and the person asks if he managed to recruit the protagonist or not. He says no, and that it was a difficult recruitment, which makes the person on the other end quite irritated. The person says he can't do anything right, and that regardless of whether Kang is rank F or E, Min-hyuk should have used the company's reputation to convince him. Min-hyuk tries to apologize, but the person is already fed up and just hangs up the call in his face. The man breathes a sigh of relief and starts recalling the protagonist's fight against the monsters, saying he doesn't even really know Kang anymore. Back to the protagonist, we see that although the diner is safe, there are still more lizard men attacking the civilians. The protagonist is fighting with all his strength to try to save everyone, but the enemies are starting to pile up, and it's getting hard for him alone. He decides to use the Shield of Trials to draw the enemy's attention toward him. But that doesn't work because there are too many enemies and not all of them are looking in his direction. He realizes he's at a disadvantage, but he knows reinforcements will arrive in a few minutes, so he just needs to hold on and protect everyone until then. One of the lizard men almost hits the protagonist with his spear, but he activates the Guardian's will skill and boosts his defense again. With that, he strengthens his shield and strikes the enemy, deflecting its attack. The good thing is that with so many enemies, he can use the skill that increases his defense the more enemies are present on the field. The protagonist takes advantage of all these buffs to attack the enemies with his sword and manages to defeat a few. But there are still many standing, which could become a huge problem for the protagonist if he's not careful. Or at least it could be, if not for the new ability he gained, the Demon's IQ, which increases his attack every time he defeats an enemy. The protagonist gets distracted for a moment while looking at his sword, but a civilian scream snaps him back to reality. The army finally arrives and the soldiers start shooting at the lizard men, not stopping until they're ordered to. The platoon leader commands the soldiers to split up and search every corner of the buildings for survivors. We then see several soldiers helping the injured civilians and eliminating any creatures that show up in their path. But when one of them searches the rubble of the building, he finds the protagonist completely wrecked on the ground, holding only his blood-stained sword. The soldier recognizes the protagonist and takes him to his superior, where they watch a recording of the fight that happened in the building moments earlier. The protagonist is shown soloing all the lizard men, slicing through them one by one with hatred in his eyes. Seeing this, the commanding officer asks if he's a ranger, but they don't know and simply say that the protagonist just appeared out of nowhere and started tearing through the monsters. They assume he's just a hunter playing the hero, but fortunately, no lives were lost because of it. The commander orders them to identify the protagonist and place him under arrest, because it doesn't matter if his intentions were good. If they let incompetent hunters keep doing this, they're going to have a serious headache in the future. But the soldier says the problem is something else, and judging by the protagonist's condition, they can't even tell if he was still alive after all that. Luckily, the protagonist wakes up, and we see that the soldier who saved him was Kim Chunsik, the same guy he saved in the dungeon at the beginning of the story. The protagonist remembers him and wonders how his grandmother's surgery went, but he's still too weak to ask. Kim asks about his injuries and if he really managed to take down all the creatures by himself, but the protagonist just gets up saying he needs to go. Kang stands up and takes a few steps, with Kim saying he wouldn't get far in that condition. And sure enough, the protagonist only walks a few steps before collapsing to the ground, and Kim realizes his wounds are worse than he thought. The hunter says that since the protagonist is rank F, if they catch him in that state, he would definitely be arrested. So Kim, showing he's a really good guy, says he won't let the man who saved his life get arrested like that. Then he carries the protagonist on his back and takes him away without telling anyone, even though it might cause him trouble in the future. The scene then cuts, and when the protagonist wakes up already in the hospital, he's faced with Kim's grandmother, and she says that this is a hospital, so he needs to rest. And that when he came to the hospital, she thought he was much worse, but the doctor said he's no longer at any risk. The lady offers some sliced apples for the protagonist to eat, saying he just needs to eat, sleep, and follow the doctor's advice to get better. She says he's the one who saved her grandson and that she had been waiting a long time to meet him and had heard he was an amazing person. The protagonist eats the apple, and it seems like the most delicious thing he's eaten in a long time, even making him remember his childhood when his mother was still alive. The journalist prepares to go live and announce the tragedy that occurred tonight in Wangsimi regarding the E-rank portal. Then he talks to a soldier and asks about the citizen who went missing after the incident and questions whether they were able to hear testimonies. To that, the soldier replies that as soon as he arrived, he approached to help the young man but noticed that all the monsters were already dead. Therefore, they thank Kang for the help received and say that thanks to this hero, ordinary people survived the disaster. The soldier continues his speech about how grateful he is to the young man, while the latter is wondering why they are still doing this. Putting all of that aside, the protagonist in his thoughts knows that now it's more dangerous than ever. He continues saying that this test was not given by a mere Asmound, but at battle he chose to fight alone. Thus, a mini flashback of his fight against the monster is shown. With great difficulty, he manages to cut off one of the creature's hands. Meanwhile, he was stacking bodies around him, but even so, more and more mutant lizards kept coming. Seeing that the situation neither worsened nor improved, he said that even though he had taken down 10 of the monsters, it wasn't enough to weaken them. But the system appears and activates his demonic ability, allowing his attack power to temporarily increase. The elder lizard charges at him, pointing its spear. It even tries to strike the MC, who was still distracted. But nothing works since the protagonist is now stronger than before and therefore manages to send more and more lizards to their graves. After activating his aromatic blood ability, the protagonist jumps up toward the monster. And with that, the wild demonic nature ability is partially activated along with the others. Covered in monster ketchup, he notices something different about his body. He says that regardless of his will, an attack is unleashed automatically. Again, other abilities are activated as he becomes unstoppable and relentless. A cluster of bodies is around him and they all have one thing in common. They're all lying on the ground. But despite his strength, his endurance remains the same, causing him to get tired. The blood power abilities continue to activate. But this time, another ability was triggered. The Guardians allowing his HP and defense to be restored in addition to removing the abnormal status. Back in the hospital, He says that if it weren't for the Guardian's ability, he doesn't know what would have happened if he had continued with the madness forced upon him. Best, he continues saying that the blood power ability is not of this world, and that even the system makes mistakes when explaining it. Worried about what happened, he doesn't notice someone offering him an apple. A lady who was hospitalized with him offers delicious apples for him to eat and recover. She says it's admirable that there are people like the hero of the disaster. She also says someone donated money for her surgery. The MC says nothing, but the one who donated the money for her surgery was actually himself, as she is his grandmother, and she says it was hard to find out who it was. Since what person in their right mind would give money to someone they don't know? And when he remembers, he transferred it directly from his account. She continues saying it's hard to accept and use the money for the surgery, and that's when the MC asks why she hasn't done the surgery yet. So she goes on and says she decided to accept the money, and that maybe next week they'll allow the surgery to be done. Putting that conversation aside, Kang asks her what qualifications are needed to receive the Guardian's blessing. And that's when the lady interrupts and starts talking about her grandson who grew up alone, and that all of this must be a blessing so he won't remain alone. Kang continues eating normally, but he chokes on the words spoken by the lady, so he remembers that he is different from those monsters and finds joy in helping people. Then he wishes the lady luck and hopes everything goes well with her surgery, and that makes his divine power and faith increase. After his rehabilitation in the hospital, the MC finds himself in front of a building surrounded by protection. He rolls up his sleeves and with conviction says he needs to find more information about the power of demonic blood. He continues talking about how difficult it is to use that ability in real combat, and that's why he must practice control in a training center. And with that, he says that even though it's a training center, it should help a lot in the beginning. The guy who manages the entries at the place confirms the MC's entry and says that once confirmed, he can't leave until completing 1 month. Then the MC says that it's all right, and the attendant informs him he will receive more details upon entering and speaking with the system. An inspector calls for him and says she will guide him to the entrance of the training room. This time, following the instructor, he notices that things have changed a bit as there wasn't a guide before. The inspector informs him that he will have 20 monsters to fight, and if he finishes them all on the same day, he'll have to wait 24 hours to be restocked. So she says she's going to lock the door, and the MC says okay. Finally, he will be able to train to become stronger. But while he was preparing, the woman called out to him. Turning to the door, the woman says that a 5th trial stage was assigned due to the karma of a bad person. She informs him that time inside that room will pass more slowly, and he will have to survive 30 days outside and 300 inside. With that, she waves her hand and says that the reward power is plus 5 divine levels. This leaves Kang speechless and in shock. 1 month has passed since his entry, and now the system informs him that the training is over and that he should exit after cleanup. After leaving the training room, the MC hands a little card to reception. The receptionist congratulates him on completing the training and notices a different kind of aura coming from our hero. Then it shows a body completely different from the one that entered that room. This time, his body looks like Ramen Dino's. So he decides to get a new look to appear more presentable. The hairdresser was washing his beautiful hair, and after that, the MC relaxes peacefully in a large bathtub. Washed and with his hair cut, he heads to a restaurant. He eats a good meal while enjoying the calm atmosphere. He was so hungry he nearly ate the bowl too. So he leaves the place enjoying a delicious ice cream. He finally arrives home and opens the door, but he quickly runs to the bathroom, meaning to relieve himself. He slams the door and locks it, leaving his bag outside. Relieved after taking a huge dump, the MC collapses on the floor from exhaustion. Hours pass with him lying down, and the system appears congratulating him for having passed the 5th trial. A new day, a new opportunity, and this time we are in Sangdong-gu. Goblins heavily armed with clubs appear, destroying the surroundings. Some are already in the sights, ready to be taken down. With the targets confirmed, the command is given to flush those monsters. It is carried out, but it's not very effective since the goblins are resilient. Thirsty for blood, the goblin goes on destroying everything in the area. A soldier empties his clip at the monster, but still the beast keeps running toward the soldiers. He tries to use a car door as a shield to dodge the bullets, but that's not enough, and he ends up getting hit. Then the guy is relieved for having managed to take down a first-class goblin. Everyone withdraws from the area and gets inside the military truck. The guy talks on the phone with someone else, asking them to be careful out there. Then the brown-haired one asks if the guy was talking to his younger brother, and Chun-sik replies that yes, he was. The brown-haired one says the guy worries a lot about his brother, while the other says no, and that it doesn't make sense. Both are holding the phone to look at the picture of the younger brother. Noticing the guy's behavior, he warns that this kind of thing is a red flag. While they're talking, a recruit appears and says that the inspector is looking for Mr. Kim Chun. This leaves the brown-haired warrior in shock upon hearing that an inspector is calling for him. A woman named Min Young introduces herself as a reporter. Completely suspicious of the woman, the guy asks if she really is a reporter. All the woman wants to know is about the E-rank warrior who drew attention with his out-of-the-ordinary abilities. On hearing that the woman just wants to know more about the E-rank's abilities, Chum refuses to talk about it. The woman says she understands not wanting to expose the identity of the person they've hidden, but she states that she can only because she shares the same thoughts. Even so, that's not enough to earn the trust of Chestnut Chun. The reporter says that someone who truly wants to keep someone a secret wouldn't expose them like that, and all that enthusiasm seemed more like vanity than anything else. Realizing he's been cornered by the woman, the guy starts sweating like a pot on the stove. So the woman pulls something out of her bag and says she knew she wouldn't get anything out of him even under maximum pressure. Then the woman hands a package to the guy. Out of nowhere, the truck driver calls for him, making him quickly take the package without questioning the contents. The woman, in turn, seems pleased to have done her job. Back at the dorm, he holds the package while drying his hair. The content inside the envelope is nothing more than a small gift from the reporter, who wanted to express her gratitude. Sitting down, he starts to open the envelope to see what's inside. Inside were papers showing bank transfers in the name of Kang San. Chun is sitting on the bench recovering from his wounds when it's explained that all this happened after being saved by Kang. He realizes that things can't stay the way they are, so he takes action. The first thing he does is offer coffee to the hospital nurses. Both thank him since they were very sleepy due to the long shift. With that, he takes the opportunity to ask about the unpaid hospital bills. And that's when he's interrupted because someone was actually looking for him to discuss that. This leaves him in shock and he starts begging them not to evict his grandmother, and the nurse says the bills have already been paid and he doesn't need to worry. In his desperation, he doesn't notice what the woman said. The woman repeats again that an anonymous donor gave money for him and his grandmother. Her words finally sink in and he starts crying with happiness. This time, he cries over the papers from the transfer made by Kang, and he truly feels happy for all of it. Despite being happy, he regrets not being able to thank his benefactor. So he wipes the tears from his eyes and says once again how happy he is. With that, he reaches into his pocket trying to pull something out. His goal now is to call the reporter and talk to her about the person. A few seconds later, the woman's phone starts buzzing with notifications. And that makes her happy because she knows who's calling, but she gets the sad news that she won't be able to learn who the person is. However, this makes her grow impatient with the answers she's been getting. Impatient and curious. That's the state the poor reporter finds herself in as she can't get any information. The tanker of Wang Simi won't escape my hands, says the reporter, thirsty for information. Immediately, the protagonist feels a chill from the tips of his toes to his head. This time, the MC gathers with a group to enter the black portal once again. The hero Johan thanks Kang San for joining the group but warns about the risks of proceeding with such dense fog. Another E-rank hero, also known as Jung Chan, wonders what the exploration team is doing not to have warned about the fog. The D-rank hunter chooses not to say anything since he also doesn't know what's going on. But the MC complains about the fog showing up right when he arrives and questions if this could be a karma thing. He then says this is a problem they unfortunately can't solve. He continues explaining that due to the fog, visibility will be low, but they can still distinguish things within about 10 meters. With that, another guy asks if what the MC is saying means they should just wait blindly. However, Kang pulls out a jar with ants from his bag which can help them better navigate. Some time passes and the area around is completely destroyed due to intense battles. Jung keeps wondering what kind of idiot brings ants to a raid and says he's never heard of such a strategy. While the MC spreads the sticky liquid, Chan doubts if he should blindly follow him. Jung Chan complains that visibility is still bad, and that's when, out of nowhere, the alarm bell starts ringing. This makes Kang go on guard and double his attention. At the same time, a huge creature begins to emerge from the shadows. With the monsters approaching, the MC warns of their arrival and gets into battle position. The three guys use the rocks as cover to protect themselves from the attacks. Meanwhile, the healer trembles all over just from hearing the monster's footsteps. One of the mutant ants approaches the rock smeared with honey. That honey drives them into a frenzy, and they start making deafening noises. The protagonist begins attacking them one by one while his defensibility increases by 5%. He drives his sword into the ant's body and manages to take it down like Vasco. While he was focused on attacking a single ant, the others took advantage to attack together. But this treacherous attack isn't enough to defeat Kang, who manages to protect himself. However, an ant rises from the ashes and breaks the rock, causing him to be attacked without even being able to retaliate. Without mercy, the ant starts landing blows on a very sensitive spot on his head. But the MC manages to break free and delivers a strike that slices it in half. The archer fires one of his arrows. His arrows are precise and he manages a double kill on the spot. But since nothing can ever go perfectly, one of the arrows almost ends up hitting the protagonist, and that opens an opportunity for a mutant to get closer to them. At least that's what they thought, but it was split in two. The redhead raises his axe, dirty with monster remains, while sighing in relief. This makes the guy impressed with the skills of the two, even if they don't seem to care about uncoordinated attacks. However, the same can't be said for the healer. In a moment of relief and rest, a thunderous sound echoes through the area, startling everyone. This also surprises the MC just as the system begins to further enhance his abilities. More and more ants start to appear. The sounds are so loud that they can't tell where they're coming from. The healer, terrified, can't believe what he's hearing. Ants quicken their steps toward the group. One of them manages to attack the healer, who uses his staff to protect himself, but the redhead noticed in time. The attack is imminent, and all that awaits the healer is overwhelming pain. Jung Chan can't understand why the guy is being so stupid. Everyone was worried about what might happen, except the MC, who managed to arrive in time and save the healer. However, the ant still manages to bite something. What it was biting, in fact, was Kang's arm. The ant bites down harder, but the protagonist reinforces his arms so nothing bad happens. With that, the system activates his iron body ability, making him even more resistant. No second chances for the ant. Kang defeats it with a single blow. A clean, sharp cut was all it took. Commanding respect on the battlefield, he waits for more strong opponents. This time, the system notifies that all monster attention will now be focused on him. More and more ants are being defeated. The archer sighs and can't believe what he's seeing. This makes his group start questioning how strong he really is and ask if he's truly an E-rank hunter. For some reason, the pointy-eared archer blushes a little when looking at the MC. Then he asks Kang what he did to get so strong in such a short time. That question triggers flashbacks of everything he went through in the training center, all the pain he felt. Obviously, he can't say what he did or what he went through, so he simply answers that he just worked hard. To dodge any further questions, he changes the subject and says he should tell the group that everything that happened was his fault. The redhead with the little axe says that with Kang there, there's no reason to worry about unpredictable things that might happen. Kang, in turn, thanks him for such consideration, and Jung says he's never had a tank that good on his team. But Jung, although satisfied with the results of the battle, doesn't agree with one thing. He looks back and criticizes the healer, saying he didn't do anything and questions why he's in the group. Those words make Kang reflect and agree with Jung's statement. He continues by saying that while the redhead handled the ants from behind, the archer and he took care of the ones up front. However, that doesn't apply to the mage healer, who just hid behind the rocks. So he asks the guy why he joined the group, and to avoid the group falling apart, the archer tries to calm things down. With that, he also asks to explain on the healer's behalf. While the archer explains the guy's entry, something begins to happen around him. Right beneath his feet, the ground begins to tremble. The tremor is strong, causing cracks and making them fall into a cavern. At the same time, the system notifies that karma and difficulty have increased. Everyone in the group is alive but injured in some places. Then the MC warns that they are in danger for the simple reason that they've fallen into an anthill. The system then notifies that his defense and health will increase according to the number of enemies. Knowing you're screwed, Jung panics and warns that the warrior ant will arrive soon. The D-rank mutant, standing at 170 centimeters tall, slowly approaches them. In his thoughts, the protagonist starts realizing just how screwed they are for being in a C-rank area. At the same time, the useless healer starts to feel sick from fear and pain. Kang walks over and asks what's happening with Wubin. The green-haired archer of the group turns and gets ready to explain. He says that Wubin has had trauma with monsters since childhood. Jung, knowing they're in even deeper trouble now, starts to get pissed at the whole situation. He shouts, asking why someone like that was brought on such an important mission, and questions the archer's sanity. They're all shocked by Jung Chan's words because they know that's not right. Little Axe Chan shouts again, saying that falling into an anthill wasn't bad enough, and now they have to deal with a useless mage too. While the guys argue about what's right or wrong, the system notifies Kang of a 35% increase in his abilities. Frustrated and thinking he's going to die, Jung tells Wubin and Hambiel to take responsibility. The MC notices the panic setting in the group and tries to calm Little Axe so things don't get even worse. The protagonist knows that if they panic, their abilities won't be used effectively. He tries to calm him down by explaining that he understands why Jung is in despair since he's never faced high-level raids before. That's why he tells Jung to focus on fighting and asks him to trust the MC. He then asks them to look around and notice that no matter how many ants come, there's only one place for them to pass through. So the MC asks if he can handle just covering their rear, and Jung says he'll try to do that. Then he tells Hambiel to take care of the smaller tunnels as soon as the little mage calms down. Kang and his group prepare for battle against the mutant ants. In his thoughts, he says there are 35 ants waiting to be taken down, but to him, it's nothing more than training to be overcome. However, his only fear is that all the ants are higher-ranked soldiers. An ant charges at the protagonist while the Guardian's protection activates. He's facing a fair amount of difficulty since for now he's fighting them alone. They are fast and strong, so he knows he needs to stop some before they exit the tunnel. With no time for weakness, the MC resumes attacking the ants. He uses one of his sword abilities to push a monster back. He reactivates his demonic blood ability, but this time in its second form. The ant doesn't let him rest or think and ends up charging straight at the MC. While he delivers and takes hits, Kang knows it's not enough since his defense increased but not his attack power. He manages to defeat one ant and stomps on its head to finish it off and make sure it's gone for good. But the ants don't stop coming. His shield slowly falls apart, but that's still not enough to stop him. With a single attack, he defeats 3 of the advancing ants. The more ants he defeats, the more his power drops, and the loss count is already at 10%. So once again, he activates his demonic blood abilities and manages to temporarily boost his attack power. With mastery, he slices through the ants that keep charging at him. His HP and defense continue to drop even further, but his blood power increases by another 2%. A bold ant even tries to attack him from above, but it's useless since it gets pierced by the protagonist's sword. This time, what increases is his determination and focus because he knows he's managing. He charges forward again at the monsters while his power continues to rise. The ants don't stop coming, whether from the ceiling, floor, or walls. They just keep advancing. Jung Chan is also doing the best he can. He strikes one of the ants. However, another ant advancing silently manages to grab his arm. He tries to stay calm so he doesn't panic again. But it doesn't work, and he starts to feel an overwhelming pain from the bite. He uses his axe to knock a rock onto the ant. It actually works since the rock landed a critical hit on the monster. But that came at the cost of serious damage to his arm, which ended up badly injured. He starts thinking it's the end since he won't be able to use his abilities due to the pain. But then someone appears behind him and starts using magical abilities. Little by little, the guy's arm returns to what it was before. The person using healing power was the MC, who asks if Jung is trying to die or something. Little Axe Chan is shocked to see that Kang is the one healing him, and he asks him to stop and use his healing abilities on himself first. The MC thanks him for the concern but says that Jung also needs help. They fight side by side, ready to die if necessary. While Kang was preparing to heal himself, he is surprised by the ants. However, the MC manages to defend himself in time to avoid greater damage. Even though they manage to defeat many ants, the feeling is that it never ends, so they need to manage their stamina. Because of that, Kang wonders how many more ants are left after that hole. Poor Wubin still can't help his team due to his trauma with monsters. But he knows he can't keep going like this and wonders why this is only happening to him. It all makes him sad since the other guys are giving their all to fight the monsters. Calling out to Wubin, Hanbiel asks him to pull himself together while Wubin refuses to accept the reality. This makes not only Kang and Jung angry but also the archer, who doesn't like seeing his friend in that state. So he grabs the healer mage by the neck and starts shaking him. He slaps the guy and asks if he's seeing what's happening. He says they're risking their lives just to protect him right now. He tells him that if he wants to die, he should die alone and not take innocent people with him because of his trauma. Without words to explain or enough strength to act, that's the state he's in. Then for a few seconds, Wubin remembers his friend calling him and telling him about an incredible person he met during the test. Panting and sweating cold, he listens to what his friend has to say. Hanbiel doesn't like seeing his friend like this and asks if he want to form a team with him and the person from the test to help him overcome his trauma. After hearing the word trauma, something inside the healer makes him remember everything he went through. His flashbacks again and remembers all that he went through with his family trying to stay away from the portal. As he tries to run away at full speed, a little boy falls to the ground and gets hurt. His mother asks him to get up as fast as he can, and he says it hurts. So she tells Wubin to hold on to her as tightly as he can. So the little boy holds onto his mother with all his strength. Something happens to him and his mom. Something bad happens right in front of him, and Wubin starts crying. We return to the present, where Wubin finds himself in a complicated situation, to change or remain who he is. But the flashbacks seem to have had an effect since his expression has changed. Then he tells Hanbiel that he'll try his best. He closes his eyes and focuses on what he has to do to change, and says he doesn't want to see anyone die because of him. Mana particles begin emanating from his conjuring staff. Due to the high mana concentration, the atmosphere of the place also changes. While Kang fights, the system notifies that something is going wrong. The system keeps repeating about an unknown error. Meanwhile, the mage begins focusing at an absurd level. The archer does his best to protect his companion. He opens his eyes and sees all his friends doing the best they can. Kang is cornered by the ant but doesn't give up. Finally, Wubin is going to awaken and become the beast out of its cage. His magic is so strong that the entire place is consumed by burning flames. He summoned a salamander strong enough to destroy the entire area. An infernal heat settles inside the cave. Advancing toward the enemies of its summoner, the salamander doesn't stop for even a moment. More fire continues to be unleashed and spread by the salamander. Little Axe Chan is frightened by what he's seeing. However, the salamander advances in his direction, making him scared. But he's not hit. Only the tunnel the ants were coming from it is. Our MC is also impressed by the little mage's abilities. He then turns around as he realizes what trauma can do to a person. Finally, things have changed for the mage who was once treated as a burden to the group. While Wubin focuses on burning the entire place, he gets called. The protagonist asks him to collapse the hole the ants are coming from and says that's the only way. Despite Wubin's monstrous power, it's still not enough to stop the ants from advancing. So he's ready to do what our hero asked. But the ants are determined too and won't stop advancing. However, one of these monsters manages to approach the mage. Knowing he can't leave everything to the boy, the protagonist also prepares and activates his shield ability. Then he raises his sword despite the pain and exhaustion. He strikes the soldier ant. With that, the ant that was focused on the mage turns back to our hero. He seems able to strike again, allowing him to protect Wubin. Now safe, the summoner begins doing what the MC told him to do. He finally manages to block the passage so the ants can't get through. The protagonist admires just how awesome magic can be with so much mana stored. But the magic was so strong that they also need to get out of there quickly if they don't want to be caught in the debris. Struggling, Kang grabs Jung Chan and starts running as fast as he can. Meanwhile, the archer calls out to him, asking him to hurry. The entire place gets buried again. All that's left are charred ant corpses. In a safe place far from danger, the MC begins healing the most injured member of the squad. Kang is completely worn out, falling apart, but still more concerned about others. Due to all of this, Luca Bellino appears and calls for the MC. He's shocked that she appeared out of nowhere. She says that Kang has passed the 6th test and should receive his reward. The system displays the MC's current status after the reward, and he knows how hard it is to increase even a single attribute. But the rewards aren't over yet. However, the protagonist has a question for the girl and asks why the tests are dragging other people into them with him. She replies that there are some tests he won't be able to complete with just his own strength, and that Wubin was essential for this one. She explains that the variables are completely random and complex, just like the mage's entrance into the group. She goes on to say that he misunderstood if he thought that doing the test solo would be easier, and that in the end, it's all just his karma. She ends the explanation by saying all he needs to do is shut up and focus on passing whatever trials may come. Making a hand gesture, she asks if he understood, while Kang stands in the background with a serious expression. She then says that if he understood everything, he should return to reality right away. The group, seeing that our hero has gotten up, is happy and asks if he's okay. Still not quite understanding what happened, Kang asks if he passed out again. He asks why they're still there, and the archer answers that they simply can't go back, since the cave is 10 meters deep and they can't climb it because of its formation. After explaining why they can't leave, the guys say the best option was to wait for him to wake up and see if he had something like a trampoline. Then Jung asks Hambiel why anyone would have something so useless, and the archer replies that it's just a joke. That's when Kang surprises everyone by saying he actually has the item. They ask why he has something like that, and Kang replies that it's for situations exactly like the one they're in. Little Axe Chan is surprised to see that the MC carries ant bait items and a bunch of random scrolls with him. Before gather and prepare to get out of the cave, they step onto the trampoline and try to jump as high as possible. They make an even higher second jump, as the first was just to gain momentum. Finally, on the second jump, they manage to leap out of the cave. Since they left the cave, the item begins to disappear. The system notifies that the single-use item has disappeared from his inventory. Then Kang's group returns to the Hunter headquarters and reports the failure, and with that, the division, recognizing the mistake, grants them access to a new raid. The other 3 decided this should become a bigger problem, and thus the matter was resolved among them. Even so, the MC feels afraid, since this could happen again in the future, and if discovered, they could even be banned. While he's thinking about the consequences, someone grabs his hand and greets him. He turns his face to the side and wonders why. Wubin, holding Kang's hand, asks if they can do the next raid together, and that he'll work even harder so that he's not a burden in another raid again. Wubin's words make our hero happy. He replies that they are a group and shouldn't worry. With that, the other 2 start wondering about the word "we are," and it's explained that Kang uses strange words when things get cringy. Jung Chan remembers that Kang mentioned he hasn't signed with any management yet. After the conversation at the Hunter HQ, the guys say their goodbyes. As Jung walks away from the group, he starts calling someone on his phone. Then the Chinseng administration building is shown in the background. Someone is heard speaking in the background saying yes and that they understood. The lady next to the older woman asks what kind of call would make her sigh like that. She responds that she was speaking with Little Axe Chan and that they're supposedly supposed to hire an E-rank hunter. Surprised, the other woman asks what he's thinking to say something like that, and the first woman also tries to understand. With Kang's recommendation, the woman begins researching and discovers that not long ago he was nothing more than an F rank. She then remembers that Jung told her not to judge based on data, but rather on ability, and explains that the MC is the best hunter he's ever seen. She knows that if she doesn't help Little Axe, it'll become a bigger problem later because of his drama. On a recruitment spreadsheet, she notes that it was a recommendation from Jung Chanwoo. The printer begins printing Kang's recommendation. A guy receives it and wonders who the person in the recommendation is. While questioning Kang's name, his superior appears and asks who the person is, saying he's never heard of that name. He asks to see the papers and is surprised to see that an E-rank received a recommendation. Some extras in the background say that Minhyuk is causing trouble again, and the supervisor responds that he's not bothering anyone. The supervisor asks Minhyuk if Kang is the person he tried to recruit before and failed. Then he criticizes the poor guy, saying that if our hero passes the Chinseng selection, it's going to cost them because Minhyuk doesn't have an eye for talent. Sarcastically, the other guy thanks him for the great work he's been doing. After so much criticism, he stands still without responding or saying anything. At least that's how it looks, until he begins to crumple the paper. Then he turns the paper into a trash ball. Meanwhile, the MC is doing pull-ups to build a wide back and doesn't stop training for even a minute. A notification sound interrupts his training, so he reaches into his pocket and grabs his phone to see what it is. The notification came with a link to be opened. The link itself was sent from Wang Simi and is just another e-link that's been sent frequently. With that, Kang begins to think that if he becomes a ranger, he'll be sent to different places. So he grips his phone tightly and asks that everyone stay safe. Meanwhile, the ranger fleet heads toward the battlefield. Everyone is tense about what will happen there, including the guy the MC helped. They arrive at the battle site, and everyone gets off the truck. The lieutenant says the mission for the guys is to rescue civilians and eliminate the monsters, and that they must not let their guard down. because if they do, their teammates could die. The extermination squad does their job efficiently. The mutant wolves fall one by one. Even though destruction spreads, the monsters are gradually decreasing. In the background, someone yells for the soldiers to move to the next location, and so they do. The soldiers begin to reposition. They patrol the area to check if it's safe and to find any civilians or monsters. A vigilant soldier starts thinking about the hatred he feels for the gnolls. But despite inspecting the area, they don't realize there are monsters right above them. Due to the movement of the creatures, the boulders begin to fall. The combatant then notices and warns the guys that the monsters are coming from the upper part of the area. With that, they shoot at the creatures and are told not to let a single one escape. The whole place starts to collapse due to the bullets and the gnolls. One of the gnolls tries to flee, but a boulder falls on top of it. A cloud of smoke rises due to the debris, causing low visibility. The soldier, still with low visibility, manages to hear his comrades scream, who is being attacked by the monster. But despite being in danger, the soldier manages to block the monster's bite by sticking his weapon in its mouth. Then his comrade extends a hand and starts pulling his friend. Getting out from under the monster, combatant Chunsik says that this is the reason he hates gnolls. After the ordeal they went through, the lieutenant asks them to search the area and report immediately if they find more gnolls. Chunsik sets off to patrol the surroundings, always on high alert. The guy in front of them notices something wrong, so they stop for a moment. He turns his face to the side to see what it might be and is shocked. Then Chun asks his commander Park what's going on there. Park replies that he'll need to leave the formation for a few minutes, because before coming to the E-Link, he received a message from his brother saying he was heading to the shelters, but the place he went to isn't safe. So Chun asks him to at least report it to their superiors. But Park says the area isn't under the second company, but rather the third's. Chun tries to argue, but it doesn't help much. Therefore, the guy asks for understanding, saying that if it were Chun's grandmother, he'd probably do the same thing. To that, Chun replies that this isn't the problem. It's that Park is trying to enter a dangerous area alone. With these arguments, Park seems to hesitate a little. However, despite understanding, Park does the opposite of what his friend says and heads toward the danger zone. With not much he can do, Chun watches his comrade run toward where he needs to go. He runs as fast as he can to get there quickly and keep his family safe. However, his friend appears running alongside him and says he can't let him go alone. Then Park warns of the danger and asks Chun to return to the safe zone. Right after his commander's words, the other guy replies that it doesn't matter where he goes because Chun is going too. The only reason he's accompanying his friend is because he thinks Kang would do the same.
Guys, that's the end of the video. If you like this video, please leave a comment in the comment section. Also subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. Like the video and share it too. Thank you for watching and see you next time again.